I'm sure we all love to take a vacation to the past. I mean, who wouldn't want to, say, watch the pyramids get built? But before you embark on your time traveling escapades, you might want to bring a first aid kit, because trust me, where you're going, you won't be finding any band-aids. At number 10 is Radithor, radioactive water. Yep, you heard that right. Back as recently as the early 20th century, before we knew better, when radioactivity was all the rage, pun intended, some folks believed that ingesting radioactive substances could actually improve your health and cure just about anything. From arthritis to acne, heck, even a cure for impotence, cause why the heck not? It's the 1900s and ain't nobody gonna fact check you. It was like the superhero serum of the time. One particularly famous example was the Radithor, a radon-infused water tonic that was marketed as a health elixir. People chugged this stuff like it was going out of style, believing it would give them a boost of energy and vitality. But hold your horses, champ, cause before you start searching for a bottle of Radithor on eBay, let's talk common sense derived from the benefit of hindsight. While it's true that some forms of radiation can be used for medical purposes today, the kind of radioactivity these historical treatments involved was a whole different story. Ingesting radioactive substances can lead to a host of health issues like tissue damage, cancer, and other not-so-fun side effects. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support this channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. At number 9 is mummy medicine. Back in the day, mummies were believed to possess mystical healing properties. From ancient Egypt to Europe's Renaissance period, people ground up these preserved bodies into powders or potions, thinking that they could cure anything from headaches to broken bones. Who would have thought that ancient Egyptian pharmacies would sell mummy juice? Now you might be wondering, why on earth would anyone think that ground up mummies could heal them? Well, it all came down to the concept of sympathetic magic. It was the idea that if you consumed a part of a mummy, which was considered to be timeless and preserved, you would gain some of its life force and longevity. Life force from an unalive thing. Yeah. Mummy medicine wasn't just ingested, it was also used topically. People would mix the mummy powder with various substances and apply it to wounds or injuries. It was believed to possess some mystical healing powers that could speed up the recovery process, but here's the kicker. They weren't just using any mummies. No, they had a hierarchy. You see, the best mummies were thought to come from executed criminals. And if you're wondering why, well, it was believed that the unfortunate life circumstances imbued them with extra potency. Plus, if you think that this was just an old world thing, think again, because mummy medicine managed to stick around until the early 20th century. So next time you visit a museum and see a mummy on display, just remember, that thing might have been a key ingredient in someone's headache remedy. Weird, right? At number 8, the electric eel pain relief. Oh boy. When it comes to finding relief from pain, humanity has been pretty creative, but have you ever heard of using electric eels for your pain? So picture this, it's way back in ancient Rome, and you're suffering from some nasty pain. I don't know, maybe you've been carrying bricks on your back all day for that new cathedral. Now you're in the midst of ancient history, my friends, so instead of popping an Advil or calling your family doctor, you find yourself a trusty electric eel. These eels with their electric charges were believed to possess mystical properties. The idea was that letting some of these aquatic shockers zap you, your pain would somehow just disappear. Now, it might seem like a bizarre way to handle pain, but as with everything the Romans did, there's a hint of logic behind it. You see, electric eels use electric shots in the wild to navigate and hunt, and some folks thought that by harnessing this natural electric power, you could somehow overwhelm and reset your body's pain signals. Plus, who wouldn't want to be the first in line for a massage from a thunderfish, am I right? But of course, this practice raises more questions than it answers. Did it actually work? Was it safe? And more importantly, did the cure end up being worse than the ailment? Personally, I wouldn't want to test and find out. At number 7 is the smoke enema. Oh boy. Smoke enemas. Quite a head turner when it comes to weird medical practices of the past. You see, throughout history, people have come up with some pretty creative ways to treat various ailments. And I mean, either creative or insane, but I'll let you decide that for yourself down in the comments. Now picture this. It's the 18th century and someone is experiencing, say, a near drowning incident. And what do? Well, according to medical practices at the time, the answer would be to introduce tobacco smoke into the rectum. Yeah, you heard me right, where the sun don't usually shine. The idea behind this was that the smoke would supposedly warm up the body and stimulate respiration from your booty? This practice gained quite a following, and even a special gadget called the tobacco smoke enema apparatus was invented for this very purpose. It was basically a bellows connected with a tube that was inserted into the, well, where it shouldn't go, allowing for the smoke to be blown in. While the smoke enema might sound like the kind of quirky solution that would only come from a different era, it's important to note that it wasn't widely accepted or successful as some other treatments. Medical minds at the time eventually realized that this practice wasn't as effective as they had initially hoped, and gradually it went up in smoke, so to speak. At number 6, spider webs for wound dressing. Long ago, in a time before the wonders of modern medicine, people had to make do with what nature provided, and apparently, nature's architects, spiders, were considered quite the medical marvels. Now, the concept is surprisingly straightforward. When someone suffered a minor cut or wound, instead of reaching for the nearest bandage, which hadn't been invented yet, they would apply a spider web to the injury. Why, you might ask? Well, spider silk, as it turns out, possesses some rather unique properties. It's incredibly lightweight, yet remarkably strong, and is known for its ability to repel water. This made it an interesting choice for wound care, as the silk's fine structure could potentially create a barrier that kept out dirt and other contaminants while simultaneously still allowing the wound to breathe. But before you go on searching for spiders to create your own DIY wound dressing, let's acknowledge the downsides. Firstly, not all spider silk is created equal. Some spiders produce silk with potential antibacterial properties, while others might do the opposite. So on that note, there's the issue of sanitation. Let's just say those cobwebs you find in the attic might not be the most sterile choice to apply on your open wound. In the grand scheme of things, the idea of using a spider as wound dressings might be more of an interesting historical tidbit than a practical solution in today's world. Modern medicine has thankfully provided us with a plethora of sterile, advanced wound care options that leave the arachnids to their web building pursuits.
Michael Taylor. In 1974, in the town of Ossett, England, Michael Taylor, a married man and father, was involved in a Christian fellowship group, and during this time he began exhibiting signs of extreme paranoia, claiming that he was possessed by demons. Concerned for his well-being, the group's leaders decided to perform an exorcism on him. The exorcism lasted for an entire night, during which Taylor's behavior became increasingly erratic and violent. Witnesses reported seeing him speaking in different voices, contorting his body in unnatural ways, and displaying immense levels of strength. Despite their efforts, the exorcists were unable to free Taylor from what they believed to be demonic possession. Disturbingly, shortly after this failed exorcism, Taylor would return home and take the life of his wife, Christine, in a fit of violent rage. He was found covered in blood later on, wandering through the streets, claiming that he had taken the life of the devil. Number 4, Clara Germana Sell. Clara was an orphan born in 1890 in natal South Africa. She spent her entire upbringing in St. Michael's Mission. At 16 years old, Clara began exhibiting strange behavior. In one instance, she was seen running down the hallways, taking off her clothes, and speaking to someone who didn't appear to be there. Clara eventually told priest Father Horner Erasmus that she had made a pact with the devil. Witnesses claimed that she was able to speak in languages that she had never been taught, could tell people things about their lives that she had no way of knowing, and had even been seen levitating. An exorcism took place where Clara apparently displayed high levels of physical strength, able to hurl nuns across the room, and once again, she was levitating in the air. It seemed to have worked until a few days later when a nun walked into Clara's room only to see her levitating yet again. So the nun was like, "Alright, here we go again," and a second exorcism took place, and this time Clara seemed to make a full recovery. In January 2005, Maricina Irina Cornici, a young Romanian nun, began hearing voices at 23 years old. She had come from a broken home and was raised in an orphanage. After moving to the Tanaku Monastery to become a nun, she began exhibiting strange behavior. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and after receiving treatment, was returned to the monastery, where the priests and nuns decided they needed to perform an exorcism on her, with one of them stating they had witnessed the devil enter into her body. And sadly, she would not survive. She endured 3 days of brutal treatment, being bound to a cross where she was denied food or water and gagged with a towel to prevent her from cursing. After the 3 days, she was finally deemed cured and was fed, but then passed out, at which point an ambulance was called and she died on the way to the hospital. Next, we have the Juanita Gomez case. This is a pretty baffling case. Juanita Gomez is now serving life without parole after taking her own daughter's life in an absolutely brutal fashion. On August 27th, 2016, Geneva Gomez, daughter of Juanita Gomez, was found dead in her mother's home, arms spread out in the shape of a cross, with a crucifix having been shoved into her her mouth. Geneva's boyfriend, who had found her, stated that he couldn't even recognize her face. Juanita was put under arrest and soon claimed that she needed to exorcise the devil from her daughter's body, and that she had bruises on her hands because she was, quote, trying to rid Satan from her daughter's body. She also claimed Geneva had been speaking in tongues and that a demonic voice had been coming out of her. And finally, I'll be looking at the case of Christy Bamu. This is a very disturbing case, and it really shows the dangers of these kinds of practices, honestly. Although what happened here is definitely outside of the realm of a traditional exorcism, I suppose. In 2010, 15-year-old Christy Bamu traveled from Paris with 3 of his siblings to meet with his older sister Magali and her boyfriend in London to celebrate Christmas. Magali and her boyfriend Eric soon started making some wild accusations at Christy, stating that he was practicing witchcraft and that he had demons inside of him that needed to be exorcised. Over the course of several days, Christy would endure horrendous mental and physical torture at the hands of his very own sister, as well as her boyfriend Eric. Eric also began attacking Christy's other sisters, accusing them of being witches, but Christy took the brunt of the attacks, culminating in Magali and Eric submerging him in the bathtub in the form of a ritualistic cleansing. Sadly, he would not survive. And we're kicking off this list with the oldest case on the list, the exorcism of George Lukens in 1787. George Lukens, a seemingly pleasant and devout man who worked as a ventriloquist, a singer, an actor in the village of Eton near Bristol, England, became known for his bizarre behavior after suffering a fall. He would have violent outbursts, convulsions, and speak in tongues. Desperate for answers, his family and neighbors sought the assistance of Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, an experienced clergyman known for his expertise in dealing with demonic possessions. And on Friday the 13th, 1787, Easterbrook, along with 12 other associates, began an exorcism. As the ritual started, Lukens' body contorted in unimaginable ways. Witnesses reported hearing guttural growls as Lukens laughed and sang, claiming to be the devil. This went on for hours until his normal voice suddenly returned and he was seemingly freed. Next up, we have a very famous one, Roland Doe. This went down in 1949 in Cottage City, Maryland. So Roland Doe, a German-American boy, also Roland Doe, not his real name, mind you, starts to experience some strange stuff. Furniture moving on its own, weird noises echoing throughout the house, all the classic signs of supernatural shenanigans going on. And naturally, his family gets freaked out and decides to seek the help of the Catholic Church. The priests step in and agreed to perform an exorcism on Roland. During the exorcism sessions, Roland's body would convulse uncontrollably, and his voice would transform into this deep, growling tone that was definitely not his own. And according to some accounts, the kid would even levitate and showcase freakishly strong bursts of power. You can definitely see the inspiration here for a lot of the exorcism tropes we see in all sorts of movies today. And the priests, they had to do everything, apparently, that they could to restrain him, using holy water and reciting prayers. The whole ordeal dragged on for weeks with multiple exorcism attempts until they finally claimed victory over the malevolent forces apparently possessing him. Next, we have the case of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. Now, this is a bit of a complicated story, so pay attention. This is a case involving the famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, by the way. So, back in 1981, Arne Johnson was accused of a chilling murder. He had stabbed his landlord to death in the middle of a dispute. But what's peculiar is that during the trial, his defense claimed that he committed the act while under the influence of demonic possession. According to the Warrens, prior to taking Bono's life, Johnson's fiance's younger brother, David, had been dealing with what they believed to be demonic possession. The Warrens were called in to investigate, and they concluded that an exorcism was necessary to save the young boy. And during the exorcism, David had supposedly levitated into the air, predicting the death of Bono at Arne Johnson's hands. Arne had apparently taunted the demon and allegedly invited it to possess him instead. And several months later, Johnson had taken Bono's life. Fast forward to the trial, and the defense's team attempted to introduce the supernatural defense of demonic possession. The Warrens testified in court asserting that Arne was indeed possessed at the time of the crime. However, the judge ruled that such a defense was not admissible, and Arne was convicted of manslaughter. The case of Arne Cheyenne Johnson is often cited as one of the most prominent instances where the Warrens claimed involvement with a case of demonic possession. Next up, we have the exorcism of Amy Stamatis. A 49-year-old nurse and resident of Searcy, Arkansas, Amy Stamatis began acting strangely one day. She was in the middle of writing a report when she claimed to have suddenly, seemingly, forgotten how to do her job. She ended up quitting her job, and having been a lifelong runner, found that she was also suddenly unable to do that. Her behavior slowly became more and more erratic until one day she leapt from the roof of her own home. Now paralyzed from the waist down, Amy claimed to hear demonic voices whispering in her ears. She claimed to have turned everywhere she could in search of answers until she met a Pentecostal evangelist by the name of Cindy Lawson, who suggested performing an exorcism on her. The ritual was apparently successful, although Amy remembers none of it, but according to her and her family, there was an immediate change in her behavior once it was over. Number 6, LaToya Ammons. The following case unfolded in 2012. LaToya Ammons claimed that she and her family were tormented by supernatural occurrences and demonic possession after moving into their new home in Gary, Indiana. According to reports, the Ammons family experienced a range of bizarre phenomena. They had heard disembodied voices, they saw a shadowy figure of a man pacing around in their living room, her daughter had apparently levitated, they heard doors opening and closing on their own. The case gained momentum when local authorities, including police officers and social workers, actually attested to witnessing strange events in their home. They claimed to hear the children speaking in demonic voices, behaving abnormally. One caseworker saw one of the kids walk up the wall backwards apparently. Soon a Catholic priest agreed to perform an exorcism on LaToya and her children. The exorcism, conducted in the presence of witnesses, mind you, supposedly involved prayers, holy water, religious rituals aimed at expelling these alleged demons. And those involved in the exorcism actually claimed to have witnessed a significant change in the behavior and well-being of the family following the ritual.
Number 5. This photo is a series of self-portraits by the artist William Uttermolen. In 1995, William was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, which is an incredibly difficult thing to have to go through. William's self-portraits obviously reflect a lot of what was going on in his mind during some of the last years of his life. Part of what Alzheimer's does is that it affects the part of the brain that we use for visualizing things, which is part of the reasons why the paintings began to get so different from the original. This series of paintings is actually sometimes used as a study material for medical students because it does such a wonderful job at portraying something that a person without Alzheimer's wouldn't be able to understand. I think William left the world with something very sad, but also beautiful, poignant, and important. Number 4. This photo comes from the 19th century from the Third Plague pandemic. This was the first time that the plague had spread to all 5 continents. While we now know something about what that might have been like, what we haven't had to endure are doctors that are dressed like this. This is a photo of the outfits and masks that plague doctors wore when they would come to your house to treat or diagnose you. The long beak-like noses of the masks are very creepy, but they were used to hold herbs and other nicely scented things because they believed that this would help ward off the bad air, which at the time is what they thought was causing the sickness. The COVID-19 pandemic has been bad enough, so I'm very glad that our doctors and nurses can stick to their scrubs and regular masks. There's something about these outfits that just make it seem like something bad is about to happen. Number 3. This photo looks like a big lump of nothing, but it is called an elephant's foot. Don't worry, at first I was worried, but it has nothing to do with elephants and is only named that because of its appearance. This lump was actually created from the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown and is just a mass of corium and other materials that were in the core of the reactor. This elephant's foot was located in the steam distribution corridor, which is under what's left of the reactor. While this mass doesn't produce as much radiation as it did before, it does still produce a deadly amount, but it is said that if you stood in front of it for just 300 seconds, that would be enough to get a lethal dose of radiation. It's kind of crazy that even though they knew this, they were still standing there taking pictures of it, but I'm glad because now we get to see it and it gives us just a little more insight into what happened that day. Number 2. This photo is of a man named Chris McCandless, who may be better known as Alex Supertramp. Chris was a traveler who inspired the book and movie Into the Wild, which were created to follow the story of his life, and more specifically his final great Alaskan adventure. This photo is unfortunately the last photo taken of Chris while he was on this Alaskan trip, and he ended up passing away in the wilderness. A lot of people have speculated that this photo was taken as his sort of goodbye. It is highly debated how he died, so there isn't quite a concrete answer of what exactly happened to him. It is a very unfortunate end to such a young man's life, but he left quite a legacy. His story has inspired countless people and holds a special place in a lot of people's lives. He was a man who rejected conformity and materialism, and with his life and death he really left an important message for all of us to take a step back and remember what is really important. While the story has such a sad ending, there's also a lot of beautiful things that we can take from it. And in our number 1 spot today, this photo was taken by Fred Blackwell on May 28th, 1963, and is actually showing us a moment of protest. The three sitting at the counter are Joan Trumpour, Anne Moody, and their sociology teacher, John Salter. The reason why this photo is so important is because these three are sitting at a white-only counter at Woolworth's Five and Dime store in Jackson, Mississippi, while being assaulted by an angry mob. People are throwing condiments at them and I'm sure saying some pretty nasty things. The two students went to Tougaloo College, which was a black college that ended up being at the core of the civil rights movement in Mississippi. It's amazing to see how brave they are, and a photo like this really is such an important message for us to remember today. In our number 10 spot. At first, this photo just looks like a silly good time between two boys, but what happens next is when it gets kind of crazy. The two in the photo are brothers, Michael and Sean McQuilkin, and it is from August 20th, 1975, when they were at Morro Rock in Sequoia National Park in California. The photo was taken by their sister Mary after they all thought that their hair standing up was absolutely hilarious and decided to snap a few photos to remember the moment. Well, they surely will never forget it, because just a few moments after this photo was taken, they were actually struck by lightning. One of the brothers said that he raised his hand into the air and that the ring he had on was buzzing, and then suddenly they were all on the ground and smoke was pouring out of Sean's back. The good news is that they all survived the lightning that day, but I bet it certainly wasn't the day that they had planned. In our number 9 spot, this photo was taken by David Seymour in 1948. This photo was taken in Warsaw, and the child in the photo is named Tereska, who was in a home for emotionally disturbed children after being raised in a concentration camp. The drawing on the blackboard is what she drew when the children were asked to draw home. While it is obviously common for children to have indistinguishable drawings, her backstory and the look in her eyes really tell a story. I hope she was able to grow and overcome some of the horrible things that she had been put through. I really wish I could know exactly what she was trying to draw and depict. In our number 8 spot, this is a photo from 1991 and is of Rajiv Gandhi, who is the 6th Prime Minister of India. He took office after his mother had been assassinated and was the youngest Prime Minister at only 40 years old. This photo was taken by a 21-year-old local photographer named Haribabu, but little did everyone know, this would be the last photo he took and the last photo ever taken of Rajiv. Moments after this photo was taken, the woman in the bottom left corner with the orange flowers in her hair approached Rajiv, and when she bent down to touch his feet, she detonated a belt of explosives that she had on under her dress. This explosion ended up killing them all and around 13 other people. Haribabu's camera ended up staying intact throughout the blast, and this is how we were able to retrieve this photo. Coming in at number 7. This photo carries quite the backstory. This photo is of Violet Spears, who was born in Elgin, Scotland in 1839. She was married at 15, and by the time she was 22, she had 4 children. At 33, her husband ended up passing away due to a hunting accident, and Violet then packed up her and the kids and went to her sister's, where they all remained for 2 years. After these 2 years, Violet just disappeared from her sisters, leaving all of her children behind. No one heard from her for a year after she left, but money began to be sent to them monthly. In 1876, a medium and hypnotist named Madame Violet began to gain popularity in Edinburgh. She had a small following at the time that she called her Hive. Slowly, her seances began to get more elaborate and outrageous, and she slowly began to ask clients to donate small bits of blood, saying that it helped her connect connect to the spirits. She would actually drink the blood given to her, and she has been quoted saying that this element returned to me, had been missing my whole life. Eventually her hive grew and they all ended up living together and would only come out at night. They would attract and convince men and women, usually with the help of drugs and alcohol, to donate a bit of blood, and most often would convince these people to leave their lives to come and join the hive. The hive continued to grow for the coming decade, but when the son of a prominent councilman joined the hive and ended up developing an infection from the bloodletting and actually died, the hive was condemned and they ended up being disbanded. Madame Violet ended up living until 1930, where she died at the age of 90. In our number 6 spot, this photo comes from what is left of the Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. This prison used to be the most famous and the most expensive in the world, but now this is the sort of thing that is left of it. This prison is actually now used as a tourist attraction, and it becomes a haunted house during Halloween. The prison used to house some pretty high-profile prisoners, such as Scarface himself, Al Capone. The prison was opened in 1829 and was known for its advanced technology for the time. Things like central heating, flush toilets, and shower baths in each cell. These were all considered luxuries in 1829. The first prisoner to be held there was Charles Williams, who was facing a 2-year sentence for theft. When he arrived at the prison, he had a hood over his head so as to protect his identity, but also so that he wouldn't know what the rest of the prison looked like, so he would be unable to plan an escape. While prison is never good, the craziest thing about this specific one is that all the prisoners lived in isolation. I can't even imagine what that would be like, especially for the people who found themselves in there for long periods of time.
We're taught a lot about World War II in school, and rightfully so, but there's a very interesting unit of the Allied forces that you probably weren't taught about, the Ghost Army. During World War II, a highly secretive unit known as the Ghost Army played an interesting strategic role in deceiving the enemy. The unconventional unit was composed of artists, designers, and even actors tasked with creating elaborate deceptions to mislead the Axis forces. They employed a wide range of clever tactics, inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery to create the illusion of this massive military presence where there were actually just a few soldiers. These inflatable props, known as rubber dummies, were so convincing from a distance that they fooled enemy reconnaissance planes. The sound and radio deception were also major components of their operations. They broadcast like fake radio transmissions, imitating the sounds of large army movements, complete with phony chatter and like code words. This all misled the enemy about the locations and intentions of Allied forces, and they would also use deceptive camouflage techniques like painting fake vehicle tracks and creating dummy airfields to divert enemy attention away from the actual Allied targets. This unit played a big role in some significant portions of the war, like the Normandy invasion and the Battle of the Bulge, by confusing and distracting the enemy. But a lot of us didn't learn about this in school because the Ghost Army's existence remained top secret for decades after the war, with their efforts only becoming declassified in the 90s. Number 4, the Basano vase. The Basano vase, or vase, cursed, spooky tale connected to an old vase from the 15th century. This vase, also known as the unlucky vase, has a creepy reputation for causing terrible luck and even death to its owners. The story goes that the vase was made in Italy as a wedding gift, but brought misfortune to the newlywed. Bride died unexpectedly soon after the wedding, and from there, things only got worse for the owners. Accidents, illnesses, and untimely deaths seemed to follow anyone who came into possession of the thing. Even people who just handled it reported bad luck, injuries, and just a general sense of doom surrounding it. And because of all this dark history, the Basano vase, or vase, has garnered quite the reputation and has survived through the years, now sitting in an Italian museum. Visitors are warned about its curse, and many find it eerie and unsettling to be around. Next on the list, we have the Devil's Footprints. In February of 1855 in Devon, England, all you English people, you always schooling me on the pronunciation. Is it Devon? Devon? Anyway, a series of mysterious footprints resembling cloven hooves appeared across a vast area of snow-covered terrain spanning roughly 40 to 100 miles. Local residents were unsurprisingly pretty surprised and deeply unsettled by these odd China tracks. Each footprint measured about 4 inches in length, followed a consistent single file pattern, as if they were left behind by a two-legged creature with hooves. Now, there's not a lot of solid evidence to sift through with this case, which makes it hard to really take a stance on. It's not like we have photographs of the tracks or anything. Still unknown exactly what caused these tracks. There are tons of theories, of course. Maybe it was just an elaborate hoax, or maybe there was something supernatural going on. Considering when this happened, someone pointed to the devil being the most likely culprit at the time, and, you know, who's to say, right? It could have been Satan. There's also speculation that it could have been caused by some exotic animal, like a kangaroo, somehow made its way over there. There aren't any known records of kangaroos having been in the area at the time, of course. Most likely this was Satan. And at number 2, we have the Flannan Isles lighthouse disappearance. This revolves around the eerie disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers on a remote Scottish island in 1900. On one December morning, a passing ship noticed something strange. The lighthouse's signal wasn't lit. When they attempted to make contact via signal rockets and a horn, there was no response. So concerned, they reported the situation to the mainland. A rescue party was dispatched to the island, and upon arrival, they found the lighthouse keeper's quarters in a state of disarray. The beds appeared to have been hastily abandoned. Personal belongings were left behind. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, though. The kitchen table had even been set for a meal. Even stranger, one of the clocks had stopped, and the lighthouse's logbook contained some strange entries. On December 15th, an entry noted severe winds, but the final log entry on December 26th simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." There were searches of the island and its surroundings, but the 3 lighthouse keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were never found. And coming in at number 1, we have the USS Cyclops. Yes, we have a Bermuda Triangle mystery for you. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918 is a maritime mystery that has never been solved. This massive US Navy cargo ship with 309 people on board vanished without a trace while traveling in the Bermuda Triangle, a region known for its mysterious ship and plane disappearances, of course. The USS Cyclops was on a routine voyage from Brazil to Baltimore, Maryland, carrying a load of manganese ore, but it never arrived at its destination, and no distress signals or messages were ever received. There was a massive search by both the US Navy and the Coast Guard, but no wreckage or debris from the ship was ever found. The ship that just kind of vanished into thin air. Numerous theories had been proposed to explain the disappearance: storms, structural issues, possible sabotage. Some, of course, believe that the Bermuda Triangle's supposed supernatural properties played a role here, while others suggest the ship may have fallen victim to enemy action. This was during World War I. The USS Cyclops remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in maritime history and the largest loss of life in history of the United States Navy, not directly involving combat. And we're starting things off at number 10 with the Sultana explosion. The Sultana explosion was a major disaster that happened during the American Civil War. On April 27, 1865, the steamboat Sultana, overloaded with Union soldiers recently released from the Confederate prison camps, exploded on the Mississippi River near Memphis, Tennessee. It is one of the deadliest maritime disasters in US history. The ship was designed to carry around 376 passengers, but on this particular day it was carrying an estimated 2,100 people, including Union soldiers who had survived the Confederate prison camps like Andersonville. And the boat was overcrowded because the government paid a bonus for every soldier transported home, and the Sultana's owners, eager to, of course, make more money, ignored safety regulations. And the explosion occurred around 2 a.m. when the steam boilers ruptured, causing a massive fire. The disaster claimed the lives of over 1,800 people, many of whom were killed in the explosion, while others drowned or succumbed to injuries and exposure in the cold river waters. The exact cause of the explosion is still uncertain, but it was likely due to a combination of factors, including overcrowding, poor maintenance of the boilers, and the use of low-quality materials in the vessel's construction. Next up, we have the various types of human species. This is something that has always fascinated me. In the very distant past, past, there wasn't just one or two, but a total of 8 different human species that roamed the Earth. These ancient relatives of ours existed at various times and in different parts of the world. Some existed at the same time, though. We Homo sapiens are the only surviving human species today. That's pretty obvious. The history of our family tree, though, pretty diverse. One of our earliest cousins was Homo habilis, who lived in Africa around 2.4 million years ago. They were skilled tool makers, scavengers. Then came Homo erectus. Probably heard of them. They appeared around 2 million years ago, and they were the first to venture out of Africa, spreading to Asia and beyond. Neanderthals, of course, or Homo neanderthalensis, lived in Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were skilled hunters. They even created art. It's believed we just killed them all off, but some of their DNA actually still lingers in our population to this day, particularly amongst Europeans. Then we had Homo floresiensis, known as also hobbits, who inhabited Indonesia's Flores Island and stood like 3 feet tall. That'd be about, I guess, this. Homo naledi, a recently discovered species in South Africa, and we can't forget, of course, about the mysterious Denisovans, known from DNA extracted from a finger bone. They're an ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, though. They lived in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And finally, this one here lived in what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe. Number 8, rat kings. This is just really icky. I remember when I first heard about this, I cringed. Just the thought of this is awful. Rat kings are an odd, incredibly eerie phenomenon that has been reported a number of times over the years. So these occurrences involve groups of rats, typically 4 to 8 of them, becoming entangled by their tails, forming this like disturbing rat cluster. Pretty gnarly sight. The exact cause of rat kings is kind of a mystery. Some experts speculate that it happens when rats nest closely together in warm places and their tails become intertwined over time. Others suggest that it could be a result of just chance, of course, or unusual behavior amongst the rats. Rat kings have been reported in various parts of the world: Germany, France, and the United States. Number 7, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic. This one is very strange, similar to the dancing plague. If you watch this channel consistently, you know what that is. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962 is one of the strangest events in history, and I only just learned about it today. It all began in a remote girls' school in Kashasha, a small village in what is now Tanzania. Started with just 3 students who suddenly burst into uncontrollable fits of laughter, seemingly for no apparent reason. What made this phenomenon especially baffling was how infectious it proved to be. The laughter quickly spread to many of the other students, affecting 95 out of 159 girls at the school. And these episodes of this hysterical laughter varied in duration, lasting anywhere from a few hours to several days. They not only disrupted the normal routine of the school, but also extended to the point the school was actually forced to close its doors. Even more perplexing was the fact that the extensive medical examinations conducted at the time didn't identify any physical or infectious cause behind this odd behavior. And the main theory among experts is that the laughter epidemic was psychogenic, so it stemmed from psychological or emotional factors rather than some physical source. Believed to be a form of mass psychogenic illness, where the power of suggestion played a significant role in triggering and perpetuating the unusual laughter, kind of like that dancing plague. And at number 6, we have the Somerton Man. So this all started when an unidentified man was found dead on Somerton Beach near Adelaide in 1948. In his pocket, authorities discovered a scrap of paper with the words "Tamam Shud," meaning ended or finished in Persian. This scrap was traced to a rare book of Persian poetry found in an abandoned car near the beach, which contained a secret code that has still never been deciphered. And there were extensive investigations, but the man's identity still unknown, and the cause of death still unconfirmed. Autopsy results suggested poisoning, but the specific poison used was never identified. And even more strange, all all the labels had been removed from his clothing, and there was no identifying marks or documents in his possession. Like with any mysterious case, this one has given rise to a number of theories and speculations: espionage, a secret love affair, but despite amateur detectives and even experts' attempts to crack the case, the mystery of the Somerton man is still a mystery.
Number 5. Residential schools. Many people think Canada is all sunshine and rainbows, but we actually have our own dark past. In Canada, the Indian residential school system was a network of boarding schools for Indigenous peoples. The network was funded by the Canadian government's Department of Indian Affairs and administered by Christian churches. The school system was created to isolate Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and religion in order to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture. Over the course of the system's more than 100-year existence, around 150,000 children were placed in residential schools nationally. The residential school system harmed Indigenous children significantly by removing them from their families, depriving them of their ancestral languages, and mistreating them both physically and mentally. Conditions in the school led to student malnutrition, starvation, and disease. The legacy of the system has been linked to increased prevalence of post-traumatic stress, alcoholism, use of illegal substances, and generational trauma in Indigenous peoples. The number of school-related deaths remains unknown due to incomplete records, but estimates range from 3,200 to over 30,000, and there are thousands of unmarked graves for the poor students. It's disgusting that this happened, and Canada has still not shown how sorry they are for these crimes. Number 4. Only gay men got AIDS. The AIDS epidemic caused by HIV found its way to the United States between the 1970s and 1980s. During the epidemic of the 1980s, LGBTQ+ communities were further stigmatized as they became the focus of mass hysteria, suffered isolation and marginalization, and were targeted with extreme attacks of violence in the United States. This is because it was known as a gay disease, which simply isn't true. Diseases don't discriminate based on sexual orientation, but due to this myth, many people didn't get the help they needed when it came to AIDS. One of the best known works on the history of HIV and AIDS is the 1987 book And the Band Played On by Randy Schultz, which claims that Ronald Reagan's administration dragged its feet in dealing with the crisis due to homophobia, while the gay community viewed early reports and public health measures with corresponding distrust, thus allowing the disease to spread further and infect hundreds of thousands more. US leaders had remained largely silent and unresponsive to the health emergency, and it wasn't until September 1985, 4 years after the crisis began, that President Ronald Reagan first publicly mentioned AIDS. If Reagan took steps 4 years earlier to help and wasn't so homophobic, many lives would have been saved. But he ignored it. As of 2018, 700,000 people have died of HIV or AIDS in the United States since the beginning of the epidemic, and nearly 13,000 people with AIDS in the United States die each year. Number 3. Slavery wasn't just in the South. Though school taught us something different, Southerners were not the only ones who owned slaves in the United States. The colonial North thrived on the slave trade in the 1700s. During the Revolution, George Washington told Northern and Southern colonists that we must fight the British so we don't become as tame and abject slaves as the blacks we rule over with such arbitrary sway. By 1804, slavery was abolished in the North, but not all at once. Some states left in provisions to slowly free slaves over time, and by 1840, Connecticut still had 17 slaves listed on the census. In New York City, the situation was especially shameful. A fifth of the city's population was slaves in 1740, and New York had the second highest rate of slave ownership in the country, behind only Charleston, South Carolina. 42% of residents owned slaves, according to the New York Public Library. 42%. Slave labor built much of the city, and although they didn't have to work on plantations, they were still considered property to be bought, sold, and used. Number 2. The truth about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving didn't start off happy like it is now. According to Ramona Peters, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe's tribal historic preservation officer, quoted in the Indian Country Today media network, President Lincoln promoted the celebration of a happy meal between the Pilgrims and the Indians to create a feeling of harmony and bring together a country after the Civil War. But there was nothing harmonious about how the Thanksgiving holiday came about, as it resulted in the death of an entire Indian tribe. In 1636, when a dead man was discovered in a boat in Plymouth, English Major John Mason and his soldiers blamed the Piquet Indians. They then ended the lives of 400 of them in retribution, including women and the young. The governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, William Newell, proclaimed, "From this day forth shall be a day of celebration and thanksgiving for subduing the Piquets." So yeah, it wasn't at all happy, it was dark. Really dark. And coming in at number 1 is Gandhi wasn't as great as he seemed. Gandhi inspired movements for civil rights and freedom across the world, but most of us don't know that Gandhi abandoned his wife to live with a rich male bodybuilder before he got involved in British-Indian relations. Now, if Gandhi was gay, who cares? But Gandhi tried to get all references to homosexual traditions erased from Indian temples in an act he called sexual cleansing. And to test his resistance to sexual temptation, he would sleep in bed naked with young women, including his grandnieces. But worse than his sexual hypocrisy was his terrible racism. Gandhi may have wanted India freed from British rule, but he was perfectly happy with the rigid caste system of the nation. Gandhi wrote of a time when he and his followers were led to a lower caste jail for protesting. "We could understand not being classed with whites, but to be placed on the same level as the natives seemed too much to put up with. They are as a rule uncivilized, the convicts even more so. They're troublesome, very dirty, and live like animals." When asked about Indian views on race versus white South Africans, he wrote, "We believe as much in the purity of races as we think they do." Although Gandhi did bring some good to the world, it's important to note that he wasn't as great as he seemed, and people need to know this. Number 10. Chinese foot binding wasn't just to please men. Women have historically gone to extreme measures to meet cultural standards of beauty to attract the opposite sex, from wearing tight corsets to walking in heels. In China, this standard of beauty was achieved by foot binding. A young girl's bones were broken and her feet tightly bound so that her lotus feet now appeared small and dainty. In their research book Bound Feet, Young Hands, author Lauren Bosman and Hill Gates revealed that some girls' feet were bound at a very young age, not to catch a husband, but to force them to work. What's groundbreaking about our work is that foot binding was not confined to the elite, Lauren, the book's co-author, told HuffPost. The study, Lauren added, dispels the view that the goal was only to try to please men. The authors interviewed over 1,800 women across China to uncover that foot binding was prevalent among many peasant families to create immobility for girls so that they would stick around and do hard work that their families depended on for selling goods. And I feel like hearing this just makes it even worse. Number 9. Alexander Graham Bell didn't invent the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell wasn't the inventor of the telephone like we were all taught, but he was the first to patent it. Turns out Bell was actually one of several men who were working on the telephone idea at the same time, but he got to the patent office before them. However, in 2002, US Congress recognized impoverished Florentine immigrant as the inventor of the telephone rather than Alexander Graham Bell. The Guardian reported historians and Italian Americans won their battle to pursue Washington to recognize a little-known mechanical genius, Antonio Meucci, as the father of modern communications, 113 years after his death. The resolution declared Antonio's teledeforno, demonstrated in New York in 1860, made him the inventor of the telephone in the place of Bell, even though it was Bell who took out a patent 16 years later. It is the sense of the House of Representatives that the life and achievements of Antonio Meucci should be recognized and his work in the invention of the telephone should be acknowledged, the resolution stated. So he didn't invent it, he just made it first. Number 8. Vincent van Gogh wasn't romantic. The story of Vincent van Gogh's severed ear is legendary in the art world, but he definitely didn't do it for love or mail it to his girlfriend. Van Gogh cut off his left ear when tempers flared with Paul Gauguin, the artist with whom he had been working for. It wasn't for love, it happened during one of his mental breakdowns. Also, there's a rumor that he ate yellow paint in hopes to be happy. Now, this has never been proven, but if he did eat specifically yellow paint, it wasn't to make him happy. He struggled with mental health issues, yes, but he would have eaten it because he knew it was bad for him and he wanted to end his life. He was smart enough to know that eating it wouldn't make him happy. Like, Come on. During his time at the institution in Saint Remy, he wrote a letter to Theo. It appears that I pick up filthy things and eat them, although my memories of these bad moments are vague. The medical notes of Dr. Pryron, his physician, revealed that he wanted to poison himself by eating paint and drinking turpentine. That's probably why he wasn't allowed in his studio while he was suffering from his attacks. So no, it wasn't because he wanted to be happy, it was because he wanted to end his life. So no, he did not do any of these things because it was romantic, it was because he was mentally ill and struggling. Number 7. The Wright brothers weren't the first to fly. We were taught that the Wright brothers were the first men to fly, but that is wrong. They did come up with the first truly controllable aircraft, but the real claim for first in flight fame goes to German immigrant named Gustav Whitehead that occurred in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In 2013, Jane's All the World's Aircraft, which calls itself the world's foremost authority on aviation history, named the August 1901 flight by Whitehead as the first successful powered flight in history. Jane reviewed evidence from aviation researcher John Brown that Whitehead may have made 1 and possibly 2 flights in a small monoplane of his own design and powered by a tiny motor also of his own design as early as 1901, which was 2 full years before the Wright brothers. Number 6. America wasn't the good guy in World War II. Okay, I know how that sounds, so hear me out. World War II is often hailed as the last war where there were clean lines between the good guys and bad guys. The Axis powers wanted to take over the world, the Allies wanted to stop them. But it's not that simple. American GIs were responsible for war crimes on par with the acts committed by their Japanese and German enemies. For example, in 1943, US soldiers invaded the island of Sicily and ended the lives of at least 77 POWs in what's known as the Biscari Massacre. Even though they were fighting for freedom, these troops threw the Geneva Convention right out the window. GIs were also responsible for taking advantage of approximately 14,000 women in England, Germany, and France from 1942 to 1945. However, things took a truly barbaric turn in the Pacific Theater. Even though it was illegal, American troops made it a habit of taking trophies from dead Japanese soldiers. And not fumbling through their pockets or taking their weapons, GIs actually chopped off ears, pulled out teeth, and took bones as mementos to send to their parents, wives, and girlfriends. Number 5. A baboon was employed. Jack, a Chekma baboon, worked as a railway signal changer in South Africa for 9 years. Yup, you heard that right. He was initially employed as a pet assistant to a disabled railway signalman named James Wide. James, who was a double-leg amputee, purchased Jack and trained him to push his wheelchair and operate rail signals under his supervision. The idea of a baboon manning the signals caused an investigation to be initiated, and the authorities, though skeptical, after witnessing his job competency, officially employed Jack. The celebrity employee was paid 20 cents a day and half a bottle of beer every week. Throughout the 9 years of his employment, Jack never committed a single mistake. Now, I don't know if this is amazing or exploiting an animal, but it's absolutely insane. Number 4. The Dancing Plague. The Dancing Plague was a case of dancing mania that occurred in modern-day France in the Holy Roman Empire from July 1518 to September 1518. Somewhere between 50 and 400 people took dancing for weeks. The outbreak began in July 1518 when a woman by the name Rutafaya began dancing fervently in the street in Strasbourg. She kept up this constant dancing for a week straight. Soon, 36 others joined in on the dancing chaos. In August of that same year, the Dancing Plague had claimed 400 victims. Dancers were beginning to collapse, and it is said some even died due to stroke or heart attacks. No one knew what was causing this reaction, which meant no one understood how to remedy the situation either. Now, by early September, the outbreak began to subside as the dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray for absolution. Now, there are many theories behind the phenomenon, the most popular being stress-induced mass hysteria, suggested by John Waller. Other theories include ergo and religious explanations. Number 3. The doctor with a 300% mortality rate. Robert Liston, a surgeon in the 1800s, performed an operation with a 300% mortality rate. Instead of saving the patient, he ended the lives of 3 people. He was renowned for being one of the fastest surgeons alive, which at that time was a very good thing. Anesthesia as we know it didn't exist, so patients were awake for the entire procedure, meaning the shorter it was, the better. Robert was performing a leg amputation, but worked so fast that he accidentally cut off fingers on his assistant's assistant's hand. Both the patient and the assistant died later of gangrene, most likely due to the saw being unclean. And what about the third death? Well, doctors and other spectators would often watch these surgeries from the gallery, which was much more up close and personal than medical galleries today. During the procedure, Robert accidentally swiped an elderly doctor with a blade, slicing the fabric of the doctor's suit coat. Thinking he had been cut open, the doctor went into shock and died of a subsequent heart attack. Thus, 3 people died during an operation that was meant to save 1 life. Number 2. Clogged toilet sinks submarine. During World War II, the German submarine U-1206 joined the war in early April 1945. Commander Karl Adolf Schlitt proudly captained the crew into battle. However, they forgot one crucial weapon in their war with the Allied forces, a plunger. At the time, the British submarines would store the excrement on the boat and dump it once they returned to land. German submarines were far more advanced and had a complicated toilet system that would shoot waste into the sea. But after being at sea for a few weeks, the submarine's toilet system malfunctioned, leading to a smelly problem. The situation soon became dire as seawater and sewage poured into the sub and began mixing with the ship's battery. With no choices left, Schlitt ordered the submarine to resurface immediately. Unfortunately, they resurfaced near Scotland and caught the attention of the nearby British Royal Navy. Within moments, they were attacked and died. Now, this is actually kind of funny because what do you mean that happened with the toilet? And coming in at number 1 is the disappearance of Prime Minister Harold Holt. On December 17, 1967, Harold Holt, the Prime Minister of Australia, disappeared while swimming in the sea near Porsta, Victoria. Harold knew the area well and had swum there many times before. He did not hesitate in entering the water despite a large swell and visible currents. He swam with one other person as the others he was with considered it unsafe, and he swam into deeper waters and was dragged out into sea. The others called out to him, but he did not raise his arms or cry for help. He soon slipped under the waves and out of sight. The Victoria Police were contacted and initiated what became one of the largest search operations in Australian history. The entire Australian Defence Force was put on high alert. An enormous search operation was mounted and around the beach with helicopters, watercraft, police divers, 2 naval diving teams, and more than 340 people were involved in the search. Strangely, his body was never recovered. He was presumed to have died, and his memorial service was 5 days later, attended by many world leaders. Now, it's generally agreed that the disappearance was a simple case of an accidental drowning, but a number of conspiracy theories surfaced. In 1968, a story in the Sunday Observer claimed that Harold had been assassinated by the US Central Intelligence Agency, supposedly because he intended to pull Australia out of Vietnam. Also, suggestions were made that Harold had his life ended by the North Vietnamese after being incapacitated by a nerve agent, of course, or that he had faked his own death to be with a lover. In 1983, British journalist Anthony Gray published The Prime Minister Was a Spy, in which he claimed that Harold was a long-life spy for the People's Republic of China. According to Anthony, Harold faked his own death to defect to China and was collected by frogmen who dragged him to a waiting submarine. So what happened, I guess we'll never know, but it seems he just went poof. Number 10. Violet Jessop survived 3 sinking ships. Violet Jessop had some horrible luck, or great luck, however you want to look at it. In 1911, she began working as a stewardess on the White Star Line RMS Olympic. Violet was on board September 20th, 1911 when Olympic left from Southampton and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Despite damage, the ship was able to make it back to port without sinking. She continued to work on Olympic until April 1912 when she was transferred to its sister ship, the Titanic. Violet boarded the RMS Titanic as a stewardess on April 10th, 1912. 4 days later, on April 14th, it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. She was later ordered into Lifeboat 16, and as the boat was being lowered, one of Titanic's officers gave her a baby to look after. The next morning, Violet and the rest of the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia and taken to New York City on April 18th. Then, in the First World War, Violet was a stewardess for the British Red Cross. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, she was aboard the HMHS Britannic, the younger sister ship of Olympic and Titanic that had been converted into a hospital ship when it sank in the Aegean Sea after an unexplained explosion. Britannic sank within 55 minutes, ending the lives of 30 of the 1,066 people on board. Now, it's just incredible that she survived all 3 incidents without getting injured, and I can't believe that after that first sinking, she would go on a boat again, because I know I wouldn't. Number 9. Carbon dioxide went down due to so many deaths. Genghis Khan was the founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. In the 13th century, he ended the lives of so many peasants that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were significantly reduced as a result. During his 21-year reign, his destructive armies were responsible for the deaths of up to 40 million people. With so many people gone and nobody left to farm the lands owned by the peasants, nature went back to its true form and grew back into carbon-absorbing forests. It's estimated that 700 million tons of carbon were wiped from the atmosphere, which, to put in perspective, is around the same amount of carbon dioxide generated in a year through global gasoline consumption. That is just crazy. Number 8. The unlucky town of St. Pierre. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, St. Pierre, Martinique was known as a beautiful town, but there was a darkness looming over it, a volcano. Citizens of the area were so used to the volcanic activity that no one took it seriously when the fresh steaming vent holes and earth tremors started during April 1902. The minor explosions began at the summit of the volcano, ash began to rain down continuously, and the nauseating stench of sulfur filled the air, but for some reason they stayed in the town. Even worse, more than 100 snakes slithered down and invaded the town. Yeah, snakes. And they ended the lives of 50 people, and people still stayed living there. Then on May 5th, a landslide of boiling mud and water from the Itang Sec crater spilled into the River Blanche and 23 workmen died. This was followed by a tsunami that ended the lives of hundreds of people. Now this naturally caused concern in the town and many people wanted to leave. So yeah, people just stayed there and went on with their lives while all of this was happening. Even after the whole snake situation, it couldn't be me. Now 3 days later on May 8th, Mount Pelee finally exploded, sending an avalanche of white-hot lava straight towards the town. Within 3 minutes, St. Pierre was completely obliterated of its 30,000 population, and there were only 2 people who survived. Number 7. The Great Stink. Yes, this is a real thing. The Great Stink was an event in central London during July and August of 1858 in which the hot weather exacerbated the smell of untreated human waste and industrial effluent that was present on the banks of the River Thames. The problem had been mounting for some years with aging and inadequate sewer systems that emptied directly into the Thames. The ensuing melee, which was further aggravated by pointless rumors, made people believe that the bad odor was capable of causing communicable diseases such as cholera. The smell, combined with possible side effects, prompted authorities to seek help of a civil engineer, Joseph Bazalgette. His proposal ensured that the sewage was no longer dumped on the shores of the Thames. Joseph's work ensured that sewage was no longer dumped onto the shores of the Thames and brought an end to the cholera outbreaks. His actions are thought to have saved more lives than the efforts of any other Victorian official. And his sewer system operates into the 21st century, servicing a city that has grown to the population of over 8 million. Number 6. World War I Christmas Truce. During Christmas of 1914, a truce was held between Germany and the UK. They decorated their shelters, exchanged gifts across no man's land, and played a game of football between the soldiers. The event, dubbed as the Christmas Truce, was considered to be a series of unofficial ceasefires during World War I in 1914. The event was celebrated as a peace offering on the Western Front. The idea for the temporary hiatus was put forth by Pope Benedict XV on December 7th, 1914. Both Germany and the United Kingdom refused to declare an official ceasefire. However, soldiers from both sides declared a temporary ceasefire on their own. They gathered together and celebrated the season of joy by singing carols. They also exchanged gifts that included cigarettes and plum puddings, and a good gesture, soldiers from both sides played a friendly game of soccer. Now this is so sweet and cute to me, like, aw. Number 5. H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes was a con artist who liked to take the lives of people. Until his execution in 1896, he chose a career of crime, including insurance fraud, 3 to 4 illegal marriages, horse theft, and ending the lives of many. He claimed to have ended the lives of 27 people before he was arrested, tried, and executed. He constructed a hotel of horrors, later known as the Murder Castle, to target guests visiting the Windy City during the 1893 World Fair. torture. Now, the building was equipped with soundproof rooms and had gas lines that could be used to asphyxiate guests. It also had trap doors and a secret series of tunnels that Holmes could use to spirit away their bodies, which he was believed to have dissected and sold. Now, in the basement were a dissecting table, stretching rack, and industrial oven. On May 7th, 1896, Holmes was executed, and in 2017, amid allegations that Holmes had in fact escaped execution, his body was exhumed for testing. Due to his coffin being contained in cement, his body was found not to have decomposed normally. His clothes were almost perfectly preserved, and his mustache was found to be intact. Now, his body was positively identified by his teeth as being that of Holmes, and he was then reburied. Number 4. Ante Pavelić. Ante Pavelić was a Croatian politician who founded and headed the fascist ultranationalist organization known as the Ustashi in 1929 and served as a dictator of the independent state of Croatia, also known as the NDH. Ante and the Ustashi prosecuted many racial minorities and political opponents in the NDH during the war, including Serbians, Jewish and Roma people, and anti-fascists, becoming one of the key figures side of Serbians. At the behest of the German senior Ustaše Slavo Kosmic declared the NDH's establishment on April 10, 1941 in the name of Ante. Ante then returned from Italy and took control of the puppet government. He created a political system similar to that of fascist Italy and Germany. After taking control, Ante imposed largely anti-Serbian and anti-Semitic policies that resulted in the deaths of over 100,000 Serbians and Jewish people in concentration and extermination camps in the NDH, which resulted in the torment and deaths of several 100,000 Serbians, along with tens of thousands of Roma and Jewish people. Now, following the surrender of Germany in May 1945, he fled, and ironically, on April 10, 1957, a Serbian hotel owner attempted to end his life by shooting him. Now, initially surviving, the resulting injuries would lead to his death on December 28, 1959. Number 3. General Yahya Khan. General Yahya Khan was a Pakistani military officer who served as the 3rd president of Pakistan from 1969 to 1971. Now, he also served as the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army from 1966 to 1971. Now, along with Tika Khan, he is considered the chief architect of the 1971 Bangladesh genocide. Yahya Khan's presidency oversaw marital law by suspending the constitution in 1969. Holding the country's first general election in 1970, he delayed the power of transition, and in March 1971, Khan ordered Operation Searchlight in an effort to suppress Bengali nationalism. This led to the Bangladesh Liberation War in March 1971. Now, Khan was central to the perpetration of Bangladesh genocide, in which around 300,000 to 3 million Bengalis died, and between 200,000 to 400,000 women were taken advantage of. In December 1971, Pakistan carried out preemptive strikes against the Bengali allied Indian Army, culminating the start of the Third Indian-Pakistan War. Now, the wars resulted in the surrender of Pakistan, and East Pakistan seceded as Bangladesh. After Pakistan's surrender, Khan resigned from the military command and transferred the presidency. Khan's short regime is regarded as the leading cause of the breakup of Pakistan. He is viewed negatively in both Bangladesh, being considered the chief architect of genocide, and in Pakistan. Number 2. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a Cambodian revolutionary, dictator, and politician who ruled Cambodia as the Prime Minister of Democrat Kampuchea between 1976 and 1979. He was a leading member of Cambodia's communist movement, the Khmer Rouge, from 1963 to 1997 and served as General Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea from 1963 to 1981. Now, his administration converted Cambodia into a one-party communist state and perpetrated the Cambodian genocide. Pot planned to turn Cambodia into a simple, agrarian, and socialist society. He forced the urban population, such as teachers, doctors, and other professionals, into the countryside, onto collective farms, and executed anyone who complained or broke rules by a pickaxe. There was more than 150 detention centers for any dissidents. S-21, the most notorious one, had 7 survivors out of 20,000. Others were taken to fields, executed, and buried in mass graves. Now, he also outlawed religion, most reading, money, anything private, and strictly governed sexual relations, vocabulary, and clothing. Out of a country of not even 10 million people, it's estimated up to 3 million people died in just 3 years. Number 1. Queen Ravaloa. Queen Ravaloa was known as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, and I feel like that explains a lot. She finally ascended to the throne on August 4th, 1829, where she immediately took out all her rivals. She had expelled the European merchants, teachers, diplomats, and trade deals with Britain and France were immediately cancelled. After one successful battle against an invasion, she slit the heads of Europeans, stuck them on pikes, and lined them in the beaches. Now, she also banned the teachings of Christianity, and she had many evil techniques to punish people, as her descendants and criminals would be dumped slowly in boiling water or oil, or tied down with ropes and burned alive. She would place others into coffins, and some were buried into holes with dirt showered upon them. She sold her subjects into slavery to boost her country's economy, which involved brutal labor conditions, staying far away from homes, and malnutrition-related deaths. Now, these people were either considered traitors, victims of war, non-taxpayers, or Christians who secretly practiced their religion. Her reign brought down the nation's population from 5 million to 2.5 million at the end of her rule. Coming in at number 10 is Nikolai Yezhov. Nikolai Yezhov was a Soviet secret police officer including at the height of the Great Purge. He organized mass arrests, tormented, and executions, but then he fell from Stalin's good graces. He was arrested and subsequently admitting in a confession to a range of anti-Soviet activity, including unfounded arrests during the Purge. He was executed in 1940 along with others who were blamed for the Purge. Now, Nikolai wasn't only ousted, executed, and disgraced along with his family, he was then methodically erased from photographs where he had previously appeared with his commander. Overnight, Nikolai went from one of the highest officers in a powerful New World Order to a shadow in a poorly lit photo and a name no one dared to utter. Now, Nikolai wasn't the only person to receive this Photoshop treatment, as it was common in the communist government to deny failures and make inconvenient truths, even people, disappear. Now, the practice has continued in current communist-led governments where rebellious leaders are removed by force and deleted from official documents. Coming in at number 9 is Delphine LaLaurie. Delphine LaLaurie was a sadistic serial slayer socialite who lived in New Orleans. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in her mansion's kitchen, and firefighters found a 70-year-old black woman chained to the stove. Now, she appeared to have started the fire in order to attract outside attention while Delphine was trying to save her furniture. Now, the authorities were led by other slaves to the attic, and they were shocked. Disfigured and maimed slaves were chained to the walls or floors. Several had been subjects to medical experiments, most likely performed by her husband, who was a doctor. One man appeared to be part of some bizarre change. A woman was trapped in a small cage with her limbs broken and reset to look like a crab, and another woman with arms and legs removed and patches of her flesh sliced off in a circular motion to resemble a caterpillar. There were claims that an elderly man had his face so beaten it was indistinguishable, and one woman had her back wounded to the point where her bones were visible. Some had their mouths sewn shut and starved to death, others had their hands sewn to different body parts, and most were found dead, and the remaining that were alive were begging to die to be released from the unbearable pain. Now, LaLaurie and her husband fled by boat before she could be brought to justice, leaving the butler, who also participated, to face the wrath of a mob that had gathered outside. Number 8. Zhang Qing. Zhang Qing was a Chinese communist revolutionary, actress, and major political figure during the Cultural Revolution. She was the fourth wife of Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Communist Party and paramount leader of China. Now, Zhang was best known for playing a major role in the Cultural Revolution and forming the radical political alliance known as the Gang of Four. Through clever maneuvering, she managed to reach the highest position of power within the Communist Party, just short of being president. It is believed that she was the main driving force behind China's Cultural Revolution, of which she was the deputy director. Now, during the Cultural Revolution, much economic activity was halted, and countless ancient buildings, artifacts, antiques, books, and paintings were destroyed by Red Guards. Millions of people in China reportedly had their human rights annulled during this time, and millions more were also forcibly displaced. Estimates of the death toll of civilians and Red Guards from various Western and Eastern sources are about 500,000 in the true years of chaos of 1966 to 1969, but some estimate as high as 3 million deaths, with 36 million being prosecuted. Number 7. Jang Song-thaek. Jang Song-thaek was the uncle of the current dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. He was more focused on following in the ways of his brother, Kim Jong-il, something that the new dictator didn't agree with. Now, at the beginning of his rule, Kim Jong-un was still considered quite young for his political position, and some of his choices were questionable at best. Seeing that his uncle didn't agree with him, he had him tried by a special military tribunal and executed by a firing squad. Now, after his execution, addition, Kim ordered all media outlets within North Korea to remove any sort of record of him, and that included any sort of pictures or information from history books. Number 6. Peter Burnett. Peter Burnett was an American politician who served as the first elected governor of California from December 20th, 1849 to January 9th, 1851. Now in 1848, he moved to California during the height of the California Gold Rush. He was appointed to serve on the Supreme Court of California, and even though he had enslaved 2 people, to make California a slave state, instead pushing for a total exclusion of African Americans in California. Governor Peter signed into the law the so-called Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, which enabled the enslavement of native Californians and contributed to their genocide. He declared in an 1851 speech that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. While we cannot anticipate the results, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power and wisdom of man to avert. Now, efforts by federal negotiators to preserve some native land rights were fought by the administration of Peter, who favored the elimination of California's indigenous peoples. Now, he also passed the Foreign Miners Act, which taxed only Chinese and Mexicans, deliberately designed to drive them out of the gold fields. Now, a wave of violence against them took place before and after.
At number 5 is the tapeworm diet. Oh boy. Back in the early 20th century, some folks believed that having a tapeworm was the ultimate weight loss solution. The idea was that this unwelcome guest would munch away at your ingested goodies, leaving you slimmer without really cutting back on the snacks. But of course, reality rarely agrees with such bizarre notions. This diet often led to some malnutrition on account of the fact that you have a literal worm in your intestines absorbing all your nutrients for you. There's also the possibility of infection on account of the fact that you have a literal worm in your intestines pooping as it pleases, as well as a whole breadth of seriously unpleasant side effects on account of the fact that you have a literal worm inside of your intestines. I mean, come on, you guys. Is it that hard to see why this is a problem? Not to mention that once you invited these freeloaders into your gut, getting them out is a whole new ordeal. So while tapping into a tapeworm might sound like the stuff of science fiction, it's a reminder that even in the pursuit of health and beauty, a little freaking common sense goes a long way. At number 4, the Roman times, the land of togas, gladiators, and ingesting urine? Oh god, it just keeps getting worse. The ancient Romans were known for their ingenuity, but they also had some rather peculiar medical practices hanging up their tunics. Pun not intended. Now don't be weird or anything, they weren't just consuming any urine, only urine of certain individuals were said to hold magical healing properties. This practice, known as urotherapy, involved applying urine to wounds, gargling it for oral health care and teeth whitening, and using it as an ingredient in various remedies. Now before you wrinkle your nose in disbelief, let's delve into the logic, or lack thereof. Romans believed that urine carried the secrets to a person's health. They would examine its color, taste, and even smell to diagnose illnesses. They had specific urinals for the purpose, designed to catch the precious liquid and let doctors perform their analysis with the seriousness of a modern day lab technician. But wait, it gets even weirder. Some Romans took this to a whole new level. See, Emperor Nero, for instance, reportedly used young boys' urine to keep his skin looking radiant. And if that wasn't enough, they even had manuals, yes, actual books on the art of uroscopy, the skill of reading pee like it's some kind of mystical scroll. So the next time you raise an eyebrow to modern medicine, just remember, at least we're not doing that. The ancient Romans may have left us with some impressive architecture, but their medical advice? Oh boy. At number 3 is morphine. In the late 1800s, a new wonder drug emerged, morphine. Physicians hailed it as a magic wand against pain, disease, and discomfort. But here's the catch. While it might have provided temporary relief, it was far from a magic cure. Opium, as you may know, is highly addictive and can have some rather unpleasant side effects, so what began as a medical miracle turned into a nationwide nightmare. By 1895, the opiate addiction had gripped 1 in 200 Americans. The Civil War inadvertently launched an opiate epidemic, with the hypodermic syringe becoming a go-to temptation for both doctors and patients alike. The addiction crisis peaked in 1896 1895, prompting a slow reversal. Advances in medicine, education, and regulation began to unshackle society from the opiate grip. Opium dens and smoking emerged, changing societal perceptions in the face of addiction. Laws evolved from regulation to prohibition to treatment, and the allure of quick relief reminds us to tread carefully. At number 2, a practice that might just leave you scratching your head, trepanation, the ancient technique of drilling a hole into the skull. Now before you wince too hard, let's explore why people would actually voluntarily undergo this procedure. Back in the day, trepanation was believed to treat a variety of ailments from headaches to epilepsy to, well, letting out demons. Think of it as the let's let the bad stuff out approach to medicine, kind of like installing a pressure valve for your brain, but with more drilling and less engineering. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Incas all had their take on this practice. They used a range of tools from flint to bronze to carefully bore holes into the noggin. But the question remains, did it work? Well, evidence suggests that some people actually survived this procedure, with archaeological finds showing evidence of healed skull openings, which is pretty impressive considering the tools and, lack of modern medicine or any anesthesia whatsoever. But let's not kid ourselves, this was still a risky game of chance. But before you grab your drill and start, thinking of a career change, let's remember that trepanation's scientific validity is, well, a bit holy. Like, these jeans should be 50% off holy, not sew those jeans up before you're late for church holy, just to clarify. At number 1 is maggot therapy, the worst one. Maggot therapy, also known as larval therapy, was a rather unconventional method used in the past for treating various ailments. Back in the day, doctors would intentionally introduce maggots onto wounds. Why, you ask? Well, as it turns out, these creepy crawlies had a peculiar talent. Maggots have an appetite for dead tissue. They munch away on the necrotic, infected parts of a wound, leaving the healthy tissue untouched. Kind of like a tiny cleanup crew crawling on your skin. The practice might seem bizarre to us now, but it had a surprisingly practical rationale. History records suggest that maggot therapy dates back to ancient times, with reports of its use in cultures like the Mayans and the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. However, it gained even more popularity during the 19th century, especially during times of war when infections and gangrene were rampant. But here's the twist. Maggot therapy has actually found a place in modern medicine too. In controlled and sterile environments, medical maggots are bred and used to actually clean wounds, promote healing, and prevent infections. These maggots are certified clean, not the ones you'd find in your backyards. So there you have it. Maggot therapy might give you the heebie-jeebies, but it's a prime example of how unconventional methods can sometimes lead to surprisingly medical breakthroughs. However, personally, I'd rather just perish.